there. Okay, now we're checking to see if there's any sound coming through, even though the microphone is on. Are you hearing anything? Okay, checking to see if there's any sound coming through, even though And here I was talking. And thank you, Jacob. You can't hear me. My assistant said I had to unmute myself. So, hey, by the time this class is done, I might actually know how to do this thing. But it's been a whole lot better than the past. This getting it recorded right afterwards, and all those people that couldn't come can actually come and watch it right after we get done when they get off work or something. Hi, Axel. Appreciate you coming. Yeah, Dustin, you'll hear the sound here pretty soon. Okay, good. Okay, sound is good now. All right. Well, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, it looks like we got 6 people here today so far. If I'm counting the unique names there, I appreciate that. Any questions before we get really into the first case study? Because I got some exciting things today, I think, for you. Any questions about trust or trustless technology or any of that? All right. Well, I will respond to the question as it comes in. I know we've got a bit of a delay before it actually goes out to you. So go ahead and write your question. I'll respond to it when it comes up in the chat window. Okay. So I am going to flip to sharing the screen here and see how close I got by. Yeah, that's pretty good. So I have on the screen today our first article, and it basically what I wanted to cover today is what does trustless mean? Because we had a little bit of people all over the ballpark a bit in their articles and how trust would be a disruptor. Not completely understand that I didn't really mean the fact that you could trust blockchain with your data. I meant more about trustless. I need to reword that question. So I really didn't take off on the essays at all if you talked about trust meaning security. But what I did want to cover is what it means to have a trustless technology. And realistically, by the time we're done today, we're going to cover the gamut of, what does trustless mean versus are we really making it a trustless environment, or are we just transferring the trust to some other entity instead of a person like a broker or a banker or a trust company doing our real estate transaction, or are we just transferring that trust to a programmer that's programmed the blockchain? So we're gonna talk about those issues and dive into that as we go through this discussion today. So in this top of this article, I liked this summary up here. It said, while trustless is defined by Merriam-Webster as not deserving of trust, in the blockchain space, it means something entirely different. Trustless in the blockchain industry simply means you do not need to place your sole trust in any one stranger, institution, or other third party in order for a network or payment system to function. Trustless systems work to achieve consensus mainly through code, asymmetric cryptography, and protocols of the blockchain network itself. The trustless environments that blockchains have created enable peer-to-peer sending and receiving of transactions, smart contract agreements, and more. So what we're really talking about is instead of going to a trust company to do your real estate transaction and having those people make sure that the money for the down payment is in escrow from the buyer, and that the buyer is qualified and has the mortgage in place and ready to purchase the property, and that the mortgage that you have that you're going in selling the house that gets paid off, that all those values are accurate and all the information is put together. Instead of having a company or a person in the middle there, making sure this transaction all comes together. We're transferring that trust instead to programmers who have programmed all of those rules and the information into a smart contract or into the blockchain logic. So really, when we talk about trustless, we're really talking about a transfer of trust. So the next question comes down here is, whom do you trust? We put trust as a critical role in our personal finances. We deposit our money in a bank and expect the money to be there when we want to withdraw it. In fact, not only do we expect it to be there when we want to withdraw it, we want the bank to pay us a little bit for having used the money in the meantime. When we go to a stock brokerage or a company that we buy and sell our stocks through, we expect that the fiduciary, the person responsible, will take our money and do with that money what we expect. Well, when we talk about decentralized applications, for example, like some decentralized finance applications in particular, we're literally talking about transferring the trust of a stock brokerage firm and your stockbroker, transferring that trust to coding that would be totally done automatically as soon as we give our money to that entity and give it instructions as to what to do with that money. So where we're putting our trust really is shifting, and instead of having those people type intermediaries that make sure that even though we haven't met the person that's buying our house, that the money is going to be there when we sign on the dotted line and say, yes, we're going to relinquish our house and sign over the documents and sign over the title deed, that intermediary is going to make sure that our mortgage gets paid off and that we get whatever's remaining after the mortgage is paid off and all of that stuff. So basically, if we're talking about cryptocurrencies, there's a trust versus a trustless type of crypto situation too. You're familiar with Bitcoin, okay? You expect that when you buy Bitcoin, you're going to get a certain amount of Bitcoin. It's usually a portion of a Bitcoin, unless you can afford the $30,000 that one Bitcoin costs today. So when you send a transaction over the Bitcoin network, you expect it to be processed. And if you're purchasing something with your Bitcoin, you expect the other person to get their Bitcoin and the product to be sent your direction. Here's kind of a situation. We always hear about the Nigerian prince who, wants to get his throne back. And if you'll just help him to hold his money for a little bit, you'll be able to cash in on $100,000 once he gets his crown back and gets hold of his money, and he'll gladly pay you. And it'll only cost you $5,000 to buy into this. And the minute he says you'd have to pay $5,000, you immediately says, time out. Me pay you so that you can get your throne back so that I can get my $100,000 back. Well, we all know that that's pretty much a scam. And so we don't pay our $5,000. But what if it were in a crypto trustless smart contract, and you knew that in the smart contract that the Persian prince was really who he said he was, and in fact the Persian prince did in fact have that $100,000 that you were going to get paid sitting there ready for it if you'll just pay your $5,000. Oh, I'd love a 20 times investment where I pay 5, get 100 back. That's cool. But because there is no intermediary and you don't trust the Persian prince without a trusted intermediary in between, you don't do the transaction. Maybe you lose out on 100,000, probably just don't lose the $5,000. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about with the cryptocurrencies and smart contracts and the environment that the trust is developed in. You trust the coding to identify that the person on the other side is a trusted individual and has what they say is going to happen. So here we can talk about two different kind of ways of dealing with things. Trustless crypto wallets, okay? There are two types of wallets when you deal with cryptocurrencies. One is a non-custodial wallet that I have highlighted on the screen here. And you have a custodial wallet. So if you go to Coinbase or Gemini or any one of a lot of different exchanges out there, it's kind of like going to the stock exchange or a stockbroker. They act as an intermediary for you. Actually, they hold the public key for your wallet, and it's what they call a custodial wallet. In other words, they're custodians of your wallet. In that case, it's really not a trustless wallet. It is you are trusting the custodian just like you would trust a bank. So in that way, a lot of people are just a whole lot more comfortable dealing with a Coinbase or a trusted exchange rather than having their own wallet, because a non-custodial wallet requires you to keep the password available, keep all the pass keys available, all the pass phrases. If you lose them, you lose your money. So, there's all sorts of stories about the Canadian man who passed away, and most of his wealth was in his private wallets, his non-custodial wallets. And the people who were executing the will, it said in the will that he had all this money, but they couldn't find the public or private keys. So they could never get to the money. And they tried every machination they could. And from what I understand, they recovered some, but not nearly the total of what was in his wallet. And I've got a comment here that some trusts, like Mt. Gox, aren't so trustworthy. Well, and that is true too, because when you're dealing with a custodial wallet and a custodian like Coinbase or any of the other exchanges out there, you have to be able to trust them. And Mt. Gox was one of the very early exchanges, and they ran afoul with the hackers out there and had most of the coins stolen from them and never recovered. So that was in the early days of crypto. We've gotten more mature. The coding has gotten more mature since then. They're more reliable today than they were, 5-6 years ago when Mt. Gox happened. But you're right. That brings up the point that if you just choose to have a custodian of your wallet, you have to be able to trust the custodian. So then there are what they call decentralized exchanges. So they go by the term DEX, D-E-X, and for decentralized exchange. One of the big examples of that is Uniswap. It is it's a coin used in a decentralized exchange to swap the different what they call ERC20 tokens. ERC20 tokens are a standard of token that's created on the Ethereum blockchain. So when you have on Ethereum, you can build these distributed or decentralized finance systems and decentralized exchanges. What it means is there is no person on the other end of that exchange at all. You're totally relying on the coding within that blockchain. Now, what that does mean, though, is that with no coding there, let's say you want to make a transaction. In order to make a transaction, what a DEX does is it has you put up the coin or the money that you want to exchange for whatever other money, and the other person who is also exchanging has to put up that money. When both of the sides of the transaction are there, then the transaction is completed. So if the one side or the other doesn't get deposited in the smart contract, what then happens is the money just gets returned to the user. So in that way, the coding just makes sure that both people have what money they committed to the trade. Let's say I'm trading Ethereum Ethereum tokens of BAT, for example, the tokens that the Brave browser gives out when you look at their ads and you work with them, and I'm exchanging it for let's say the token that is used in the Coin app. What token is that? Well, the Coin app is a Geo coin, and it's also an ERC token. And if I wanted to exchange a BAT for an ERC token for what they call it coin, in order to exchange those two, they'd have to make sure both of those were in the contract. And once both were in, I could exchange my BAT for my coin or his coin or what vice versa and be able to do that swap. And that's the way decentralized exchanges work. So, I highlighted a little bit on decentralized finance. Decentralized finance run the gamut from getting loans, putting up money. XYO, thank you. XYO is the coin that I was referring to to get swapped for BAT. So what you have is different finance systems on a smart contract that you can get loans for, you can deposit money, and most of them have people who want to earn money, so they deposit just like they do in a bank. When you deposit money into a savings account in a bank, the bank doesn't keep it. The bank loans it out to somebody else. They make the difference between what they're paying you and what the person is paying them, and that's just wholesale money being sold for retail. And just like any product in a grocery store is, they buy it wholesale and sell it for retail. Well, that's what banks do, and these decentralized finance systems also do, and they work automatically. You deposit your money, you earn that automatic interest, they loan it out to other people, and it just churns. The money just churns back and forth, just like a bank would do it, only you've got code in the background doing that. So I hope this has helped. I hope what it means is that you are not necessarily absolutely trusting the code. You're trusting the code really instead, well, you are trusting the code. You're trusting the code instead of trusting a third-party intermediary. And that's really what blockchain is going to do for us, is it's going to allow us to move away from those third-party intermediaries that are expensive and take much more time to get a job done, and having computer code do it, which does it exceedingly faster and does it much more reliably and the same every time. Alrighty. So what I'd like you to do is make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll go on to our next subject. Any questions before I go on to the next one? All right. My usual person that asks all the questions isn't here. For the second week in a row. She has a conflict, I guess. All right. Okay, so if there are no questions, I will go ahead and move to my next subject. Okay. So this particular article is taking the idea that how can blockchain begin building trust by eliminating the need for it. The idea here with blockchain is that all the way through time, we have had to trust each other in order to get along and not have wars, and just generally, cooperate with each other. There's a lot of challenges in the world where we it just shows that we don't trust each other as much as we ought to. So here's a couple scenarios. I want to go ahead and read this story here in the italics. It says, if you come around a corner and suddenly confront another person unexpectedly, and it's too late to run away, That's a recipe for a tense situation. It can be resolved by the two of you sitting down, each of you naming yourself and your relatives and exactly how you're related to them, and continuing in an effort to identify a relative in common, such that the two of you would have some relationship to each other and would not have grounds to attack each other. But if after several hours of such conversation, the two of you still can't identify a relative in common, then you cannot just turn around and say, "It was nice meeting you, goodbye." Instead, you or he or both of you must consider the other a trespasser without a relation justifying a visit, and a chasing off or a fight becomes likely. Now, that would be a story for probably another time, because we meet strangers all the time on our streets in our cities. But in that kind of a scenario, you have reasons to be in certain places. And in this situation, they're saying, okay, what if I'm walking on my property and I happen to meet a stranger? That scenario might play out. So here's another situation. Another distinction of the 2000, okay. Okay, I'm going to tell the story of another situation. And that situation was when, let's say you're in an airport. And when you're in an airport, you don't expect to be confronted by anybody. You don't expect to be accosted or hurt by other people walking around. Yet everybody there are total strangers. There are probably a couple policemen wandering around making sure that, everybody keeps the peace. But what is it that makes sure that nobody has a confrontation with each other? And the whole idea is simply that there are certain situations that you're in, such as the airport, where you just know that everybody there is there for a common purpose, to go out and catch an airplane and get out of there, and you end up trusting each other. So the whole idea here is that, can we get to the point where we can put systems in place where no matter what we're doing, we can trust one another in such a way that we can continue to barter and do business back and forth? Okay? Is it possible to eliminate trust as a basis for decision making? In other words, if I want to buy something from somebody, let's take an example on eBay. How many times have you thought twice about buying something on eBay because you're not sure that you're going to get the product? Or for that matter, if you're a seller on eBay and you're selling a high value item, what's to say that you're not going to sell that item to somebody and they're going to just get it and initiate a return and put a rock in place of the item in the box and ship it back to you saying that they didn't like it or it was broken in transit, and they get their money back and they keep the product? All of those kind of situations would be helped by a blockchain situation, and ultimately helped by something like Bitcoin, where the money is paid and is immutable. In other words, I would have loved it when we were selling on eBay to be able to know that when I sold something, the money was mine, and that if they returned the product, I could wait for the product to come back to me, confirm that the product was still sellable, and then return the person's money. But in that marketplace, if you've dealt with it at all, you know that eBay takes the side of the customer pretty much always. If they say they're wanting to return it, if they say it's broken, and they return a rock to you, you just lose. And you just hope that people are honest in that way. So what we're looking for is a system to develop trust and to help a situation. So is there a possibility that you wouldn't trust a blockchain? Of course. Let's say we talk to an average person on the street and we say, "What do you think about cryptocurrencies?" They might say something like, well, controversy or crash or risk, as it says here. They might just say, you know, too volatile, not a good investment. It goes up and down all the time. And of course, you hear about it going down more often than you hear about it going up, but that's the nature of news. So because blockchain tends to get wrapped up in cryptocurrencies and in Bitcoin, a lot of times you can get kind of a negative opinion or a negative association. So it gets this guilt by association situation. Do cryptocurrencies use blockchain? Sure, they do. Yes. Can technology be put to other uses? Yes, it can. Is it inherently risky? No, it's not. The issue here is that while Bitcoin is risky, it goes up and down in value because it gets whipped about by the marketplace. Blockchain makes things far less risky as you deploy it and as you allow it to help you with those trust situations, as long as you deploy it correctly. Okay. So what can blockchain do for us? So it's a record-keeping, trust-building technology. With a distributed ledger feature, it securely records and distributes the data such that it can then be validated and makes it very, very hard to hack and makes it very, very secure. The transactions to be validated are registered in a block. Once the validation's taken place, it's added permanently to maintain chains. And because all of the chains are identical, they feature, because of the distributed ledger, it makes it possible to synchronize the data across all of the different sites and nodes. And so if one node goes down, you still have copies of the data elsewhere. So you're not stuck with, well, the data center went down, so we're just not able to process your order right now. How many times have we heard that when we've gone into a store and their computer systems have been down? So what blockchain is meant to do is to begin building trust. And so the whole idea of blockchain initiatives is to begin helping people to converse with each other. And as we do so, it begins to build relationships and build trust between different users. Hey, are we without sound? Okay. Axel? Okay. Okay. All righty. Okay. Very good. All right. Back to it. So you have the situation where what we're trying to do is build the possibility of online commerce. And online commerce has been very difficult, especially in the global areas. There's always predators out there in the business marketplace that that are willing to be predators and take advantage of people who are new to the market or people who are new in business or that don't have the resources to protect themselves. What blockchain is going to do is it's going to increase the ability of all people to continue to converse with one another and make everything much more reliable. And the end point of all that is that it ends up making things much less expensive because you don't have the graft, you don't have the waste, you don't have the theft, you don't have the problems that currently exist, especially in the international marketplaces. So as we go over more of these case studies, you're going to see that each of these blockchains do that one particular thing as they build trust. And so the idea of this article, of course, is would they build enough trust that they don't need to have the intermediaries to build that trust for you? Okay. All right. So hopefully you've enjoyed this article, and I hope you hit that subscribe button, and we'll move on to the next article. Okay, any other questions? Everybody can still hear me. Good. I'm glad you got your sound going, Axel. That's good. We had trouble with the sound at the beginning, Axel. That's why I was concerned about it when you said you had no sound. I had to unmute me in order to get things going again. Okay. All right. Now, this is the highlight of the day here, folks. I found this article on the Sloan Management Review. And what it is an article that says basically what we've learned so far about what blockchains have done for business. And so I want to show a few examples, because basically what's happening is there is a very definite push to produce some very major blockchains out there. And we'll highlight a couple of them. And they're big names that you'll have heard before, which is really, really cool. Okay. Now, the first point that they wanted to make is that the applications that have been successful, the blockchain has really been the backstory. In other words, it's been the technology that drove it, but what implementing the technology has created so much other good. And so I've already talked a lot about TradeLens, started by Maersk in some of the videos that you've seen, and I'll continue talking about those in the videos that you've seen. But I want to give you an update, because this article gives us a bit of an update, an idea more of what's happened with that blockchain since it was initially rolled out. So they started in 2013 to roll out their blockchain. And at that point, the shipping industry internationally relied on paper. So you've seen these huge container ships that have hundreds, sometimes thousands of containers just on the deck, and they're just moving it from place to place. Well, can you imagine having a bill of lading for every single container? And that when you docked, you had this big stack of paper that you had to present to the shipping site, to the port that you've just arrived in. And if it's international, can you imagine how long it takes to get through all that paperwork to see what you have on each container and get it through the port and get it moving on to its location? Huge problems for the shipping lines, because they would spend more time in port than they'd spend actually moving the goods. And so that was a problem that was ready to be solved, that just needed to be solved. So they started working with partners and regulators. The challenge was that if you're a competitor to Maersk, do you want to really go into business with them in the same data structures with them? Would you ever want to share a data warehouse with them and commingle your data with their data? Well, that was the challenge that existed at the beginning of trying to put together the TradeLens blockchain. So the most difficult challenge, as it says here, is companies like CMA, CGM, Mediterranean Shipping, Hapag-Lloyd, and I've seen their containers a lot, Ocean Network Express, they were initially wary about joining a platform created by Maersk. In other words, I don't want to, share my data with you. Well, after a while, Maersk realized that they needed to create a thing called a customer advisory board. When they did that, they brought together 175 organizations. Those organizations worked with 600 ports and terminals around the world, and eventually they got enough of a what they call minimum viable ecosystem together, and that minimum viable ecosystem then led to a an actually viable blockchain system that had enough nodes on it that they could distribute the network and get everybody working. And the idea here is that it's not a public blockchain like you would see in Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin can't hardly process enough to even begin to compete with Visa and MasterCard and those credit card companies. They just can't process enough transactions fast enough. So I don't know how they're going to solve that problem yet. But what a private blockchain does is it gives permissions. Like, for example, when Ocean Network Express joins the blockchain, they get their permissions, and their permissions allow them to see through their private key, allows them to see their data. It's kind of like having a wallet in a blockchain system. You can see your transactions and see how much actually you have in the Bitcoin network, but other people can only see transactions. They can see that the transactions happened, but it's all encrypted and they can't see what the transaction was about. So the point here is that these 175 organizations then posted 1.6 billion events, transactions. I'm not sure exactly what constitutes an event. 14 million documents. In other words, the blockchain actually created those bills of lading and those documents that were needed by all the customs officials and the places that they needed to dock and transfer their goods. And they've transferred now 34 million containers. Can you imagine the number of container ships that it takes to transport 34 million containers? And it went through the blockchain. So the platform's business value includes reduced administrative costs, better tracking of the containers, and faster processing of documents through that supply chain. Now, if you really understand what Maersk is, they don't just have these big shipping containers that you see on the roads on the back of semi-trucks. They also, of course, have big container cargo ships. They also have their own trucking firms. They're really an end-to-end shipper in a lot of ways. So it was a big deal for just Maersk to have this in place, but now other companies are beginning to benefit. Now, the whole point here is that you've got to get in bed with the enemy, so to speak. In other words, Hapag-Lloyd is a major competitor to Maersk. They'd love to be bigger than Maersk, but Maersk is the biggest at this point. Why would I ever want to do business in the same software package as Maersk? Well, the reason they're doing it is because of the great benefits that they have in sharing that common code and common system and being able to benefit by that. So let's move on to another. By the way, it was IBM that helped Maersk to put together this blockchain and created the blockchain for them. Okay, so let's talk about Walmart for a minute. I have disparaged Walmart and their blockchain in other videos, but it's nice to see kind of an update as to where they did. Remember last week I talked about Golden State Foods? Well, see, Walmart needed to solve a problem. We talked a little bit about the E. coli breakout in the romaine lettuce a couple weeks ago, and because of that outbreak of the E. coli, blockchain could help that. Well, here's a situation where blockchain does in fact help that situation. So with IBM, Walmart decided to begin putting together a blockchain, and it was called the IBM Food Trust. And we highlighted the case study of Golden State Foods using the IBM Food Trust. And here's a little bit more bigger part of that story. Not only did the IBM Food Trust get put together, but Dole, Nestle, Kroger, these three I've heard of. I haven't heard of Carrefour, Danone. I've heard of Driscoll's or GS1. But you can see that there were a lot of major companies that got into this same blockchain, basically referred to as the IBM Food Trust. Of course, IBM was the vendor of the blockchain technology, and they worked with consultants to be able to put this together. So here they have a blockchain that now they have a lot of their vendors and suppliers all the way from the field all the way to the store. So here it talks about some of the details. The implementation teams worked for 7 months to onboard more than 100 Walmart suppliers of leafy greens, and by the end of 2020, they had 280 members, 40 million transactions, and 25,000 SKUs, or their identifiers for a product. Okay, so the IBM Food Trust is huge, and you can see that Walmart is the major force behind that one, as well as Maersk being the major force behind Tradelands. Okay. So this kind of dovetails into something I highlighted a little bit earlier. We talk about public blockchains versus private blockchains. Now, part of the challenge with a public blockchain is that in order to keep fraud out of the blockchain, in order to keep hackers from penetrating the blockchain, each of the computers has to do proof of work algorithms in order to keep it safe. So with a public blockchain, blockchains like Bitcoin can't process enough transactions in order to really to grow large. Okay, so part of the challenge is when instead of putting a public blockchain out there that is public facing, anybody can join it, you have what they call private blockchains, where the blockchain is permissioned, and only people who are given permission to get an account in the blockchain are allowed into the blockchain, of course. So, the organization that runs the blockchain, which in Walmart's example would be that consortium of Walmart and Dole and Nestle and so forth. And in order to get into their blockchain or start utilizing it, you would have to be invited to it, or you would have to apply to get an account on that blockchain and use it. So what we found is that what this survey found is that private blockchains are much more prevalent in that space, simply because they can process a whole lot more transactions in a better time. They ensure confidentiality. Somewhere here it talks, well, I'll find it later. So one example of one of those private blockchains that we've talked about is CoreConX. So let me pull up information about the core chain. Now, the core chain is CoreConX's solution for international securities finance. So it is formed exclusively to handle global financial securities. So if you're buying international stocks from an international location, you might want to go to the core chain to have cross-border ability to purchase stocks. It uses the Hyperledger Fabric, which is IBM's trademark, and they have developed this blockchain in order to help with that particular issue. The part in here that was interesting to me is that the reason why they needed to use a private blockchain, they could not put people on a public-facing blockchain. They chose a private blockchain. We operate in a highly regulated environment, they say, and couldn't imagine our small business owners posting transactions on public networks. Just wouldn't have happened. So, or they couldn't figure out how they'd learn to manage their own digital wallets. So they developed that blockchain to move around the ownership of stocks, bonds, and other securities in order to facilitate these small business owners getting their product out and getting their stock into people's hands, public offerings of their stock allow them to expand and to grow. It's one form of financing for small businesses. The key here, though, is that not only did they develop the blockchain, but they also allowed that blockchain to operate on multiple cloud services. So you see here on IBM or Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, Google, DigitalOcean, all these global clouds, it doesn't matter where they want to put their part of the blockchain. They could operate their blockchain in any one of the clouds, depending on where that particular business wanted to put their node and their software. So by having a private chain, they could allow people to join it. But when they created and stood up a node, the business could put it in their own data closet, their own data servers, or they could put it in any one of these cloud services. So they onboarded 105,000 private companies. We're talking bigger than Maersk and bigger than Walmart's food blockchain. That 2.8 billion shares of stock in the individual companies, 68 million options, 45 million warrants, and they're all negotiated and traded on the platform. Now, here's where they talk about private networks, because they process more transactions per second than public networks. Public networks actually lack scalability, and it's a serious limitation because of the inability to secure it against fraud and against hackers unless they keep it private and have that layer of security allowing people in through their firewall. Okay. Next one. This one is really cool too. So let me pop this one up. I'm sure there's somebody online here that probably drinks wine. There's a blockchain just for you. This blockchain is pretty much it's still beginning. It's not nearly as big as the one I just highlighted. But what they've done here is wines are easy to be faked. In other words, wines are a big market for fine wines, especially, and this hits the fine wine market, where wines are sold more for their value and their investment value a lot of times than they are necessarily for their for drinking. I mean, this is not the kind of wine that you go to the local grocery store or the local liquor store and pick up off the shelf. This is the kind of wine that is sold to high-end restaurants and high-end buyers that are willing to pay hundreds to thousands of dollars for a single bottle. But the challenge in that market, though, is that there's a lot of desire of people who would do things illegally to fake the wine and to label it something that it really isn't. And so one of the problems they wanted to solve was lack of consumer trust in product labeling, the verification process and validation of the certification, and then lack of access to sustainable and socially responsible products. So that's important to some people as well. So the solution was a fully digitized and decentralized certification process. So having it decentralized, of course, keeps the data all in sync and available to everyone. The way they did it was with a blockchain, and what ends up happening is the user has a one of those square barcodes on the bottle, and with a mobile app, they can just scan the bottle. So the end users just scan the bottle and they can see the full chain. They can see where the grapes were grown. They can see the distillery that produced the wine. They can see how it was marketed and the supply chain that it came direct from the distiller all the way to the store where it's being purchased. So they rely on a blockchain coin called Quorum. It is one of those ERC20 tokens on the Ethereum blockchain. That, you note, is a public coin. And because it's a public coin, at this point, the network moves a little bit slower, like we said, was one of the challenges with a public network. But what it does, though, is it allows them to get the blockchain developed, get a body of people and users and nodes built up, and then they plan to then switch it to a private network later. So they say they chose Quorum in anticipation of a market pivot from a private to public network. Building on Quorum with public blockchain in mind, they could then switch it later if they wanted to. So that kind of gives you a good highlight for the kind of blockchains that are out there and what their purpose is. Their purpose literally is about building trust. And when you can build trust, you build efficiency. And when you build efficiency, you lower costs. And so hopefully this whole process will mean a better running society worldwide. So I really appreciate you joining us. And if I don't have any more questions, I'm going to pull my screen back up here to see. I'm not quite sure where my dashboard went, but we'll look forward to seeing you again next week. I just need to find where my where it is so that I can pull up. I may have closed my dashboard. So we'll look forward to seeing you again later, and thanks for joining.